Some words don't sound cruel. They don't shout. They don't insult. They arrive wrapped in calm tones, rational phrasing, and even polite delivery. They sound reasonable. But the sting they leave behind isn't from noise. It's from denial, distortion, and dismissal. These are the phrases that twist reality, undermine confidence, and cause people to question their own feelings. Emotional manipulation doesn't always come in the form of rage or obvious gaslighting. Sometimes it comes cloaked in logic, carefully constructed to make someone doubt their right to feel hurt, angry, or confused. These phrases are designed to silence discomfort without looking like silencing. They often show up in relationships, families, workplaces, anywhere power can be quietly taken. This isn't just about semantics, it's about survival. Learning to recognize the manipulation hidden beneath a rational phrase is a step toward reclaiming emotional truth. You're overreacting. On the surface, this phrase sounds like an attempt to soothe or bring perspective. In reality, it minimizes a genuine emotional experience. When someone labels a reaction as excessive without understanding its cause, they shut the door on empathy. They don't ask why the reaction exists. They label it as wrong. This phrase teaches people to suppress instinct, to feel shame for expressing discomfort. Over time, it trains them to internalize the belief that their emotions are too much, even when those emotions are direct responses to mistreatment. The real harm isn't just in the moment. It echoes. Long after the words are spoken, the message remains. Trust less in your feelings. Trust more in their version of events. You're being too sensitive. Sensitivity isn't weakness, it's awareness. But manipulators twist it into a flaw, using this phrase to paint emotional responses as fragile, exaggerated, or irrational. This is not a neutral comment. It's a tool to flip the dynamic, redirecting attention from the behavior that caused hurt to the person who felt hurt. It places blame on the reaction instead of the action. It reinforces the idea that any pain felt must come from personal defect, not from injustice or emotional harm. This phrase is especially insidious because it often causes people to question their worth. If sensitivity is portrayed as a flaw, the logical response becomes suppression. Suppression leads to silence, and silence creates control. You always make things about you. This phrase carries the sting of accusation. It reframes emotional expression as selfishness, often said when someone tries to voice pain or bring up mistreatment. The implication is that wanting to be seen, heard, or validated is a form of narcissism. But this phrase isn't about boundaries. It's about erasure. It makes the act of seeking clarity or respect appear egocentric. It deters people from speaking up again because no one wants to be seen as self-centered or dramatic. It especially impacts those raised in environments where emotional needs were treated as inconvenient. For them, this phrase isn't new, and it's a confirmation of old wounds. A manipulator doesn't need to scream to control. Sometimes, all it takes is convincing someone that standing up for themselves makes them the villain. Not everything is about you. There is truth in the phrase, but manipulators use it not to provide perspective, but to deflect responsibility. When someone voices discomfort or highlights an issue, this response serves as a shutdown, a way to say, your perception is irrelevant. This isn't a lesson in humility. It's a dismissal dressed as insight. It invalidates the impact of behavior by suggesting the one harmed is simply imagining offense. Repeat it enough, It teaches people to detach from their intuition, to ignore the gut feelings that alert them when something is wrong. That kind of detachment is exactly what makes manipulation sustainable. Because without a connection to personal truth, it becomes harder to resist someone else's version of reality. That's not what happened. On its own, this phrase could be harmless. Facts can be interpreted differently, but in the hands of a manipulator, it becomes a tool for rewriting history. Not to clarify, but to control the narrative. This is emotional gaslighting in a calm, logical disguise. The phrase sounds firm, almost parental. It's spoken as if it carries authority. It's meant to make someone pause, hesitate, and then question their memory. Over time, that hesitation becomes habitual. The instinct to speak up erodes. When this phrase is used repeatedly, it creates dependency. The one being manipulated starts to defer to the other's version of events. Truth no longer comes from within. It's filtered through someone else's lens. This is not about disagreement. It's about domination. You're impossible to talk to. This phrase is often deployed when someone sets boundaries or refuses to accept blame for something they didn't do. It's not a comment on communication. It's a form of punishment. The message is clear. Unless you respond exactly how they want, you're unreasonable. The structure of this phrase places the burden of communication failure entirely on one person. It offers no reflection, no curiosity, no willingness to meet in the middle. It creates a situation where staying silent feels safer than speaking up. It breeds fear. Fear of escalation, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, and that fear becomes a leash. True communication involves mutual respect. This phrase is the opposite. It's a warning masked as a complaint, a subtle way of saying, obey or lose connection. You're remembering it wrong. Memory isn't perfect, but manipulators rely on that imperfection to reshape stories in their favor. This phrase goes beyond disagreement. It's designed to sever trust in one's own perception. It starts as a challenge, then it becomes a pattern. Eventually, the manipulated person loses the confidence to stand by their own recollection of events. Every confrontation turns into a debate, not about the issue, but about whether it even happened. This tactic is especially cruel because it removes the ground beneath someone's feet. Without trust in memory, it becomes nearly impossible to name abuse, seek justice, or even make decisions. It leads to paralysis, not peace. The psychological impact of these phrases. Individually, these phrases may seem trivial, but collectively, they form a pattern of emotional erosion. They chip away at self-trust, dignity, and reality. Their common thread is denial. Denial of experience, of feeling, of fact. What makes them so dangerous is how quietly they work. There are no raised voices, no dramatic scenes, just small, consistent attacks on perception. Over time, these phrases rewire belief systems. The person being manipulated may begin to adopt them, using the same language against themselves. This form of manipulation is harder to recognize because it masquerades as reason. But underneath, it carries the same destructive force as overt abuse. It doesn't leave bruises on the skin, but it leaves bruises on the psyche. Why they work, the illusion of reason. These phrases don't work because they're true. They work because they sound like they could be true. They carry the illusion of reason. They trigger self-doubt. They appeal to the desire to be fair, calm, or mature. For people with a history of emotional neglect, these phrases hit especially hard. They echo childhood scripts. They feel familiar, and familiarity can feel like truth, even when it's harmful. Manipulators often position themselves as the rational one, the level-headed adult in the room. This posture gives them credibility. Meanwhile, the person feeling hurt is cast as irrational, emotional, or unstable. Once that dynamic is established, it becomes easier to justify further manipulation. Reclaim. Resist. Healing begins with recognition. These phrases lose power once their purpose is exposed. What once felt like personal failure starts to look like patterned control. The next step is reclaiming emotional truth. That means learning to name feelings without apology. It means trusting memory, even when someone else insists it's false. It means validating discomfort, even when it's labeled as too much. Finally, it means resistance. Not always loud, not always confrontational, but steady. Sometimes resistance looks like setting a boundary. Sometimes it looks like walking away. Sometimes it's simply the act of saying, "That's not okay." From silence to strength. Words can hurt, but they can also heal. The same way a phrase can be used to silence, another can be used to awaken. Awareness doesn't erase pain, but it illuminates patterns. It makes the invisible visible. No one deserves to have their emotions twisted into evidence of instability. No one deserves to be told that their hurt is invalid, their boundaries are selfish, or their memory is defective. Manipulation wrapped in logic is still manipulation. Recognizing that is the first act of freedom. And freedom is not a luxury, it's a right. Let this be the beginning of unlearning shame, of reclaiming clarity, of breaking free from words that once felt like truth, but were always control in disguise.